The Holy Gospel according to Luke. Glory to you, O Lord. Now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to Jesus. And the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." So he told them this parable. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me." So he divided his property between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country, and there he squandered his property in dissolute living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare? But here I am dying of hunger. I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.' So he set off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. Then the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to the slaves, 'Quickly bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet, and get the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And they began to celebrate. Now his elder son was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves and asked what was going on, who replied, 'Your brother has come back, and your father has killed the fatted calf, because he got him back safe and sound.' Then he became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him. But he answered his father, 'Listen, for all these years I have been working like a slave for you, and I have never disobeyed your command. Yet you have never given me even a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours comes back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him.' Then the father said to him, 'Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice, because this brother of yours was dead and has come back to life. He was lost and has been found.'" The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Please be seated. So today, I'm going to tell you the story of the prodigal, as told by Nadia Bolz-Weber. I've spoken of her before. Prolific author, wonderful speaker. I've heard her speak a couple of times. And, but an interesting personality with, full sleeve tattoos and a vocabulary like a stevedore. So with a few edits for length and colorful language, this is the story of the prodigal according to Nadia Bolz-Weber. She starts by explaining why she put this message together. She did it because she got a heartbreaking email from a woman who was 82, had been reading her books. She said, "The woman told me how at 82, she is afraid to die because she's convinced God is mad at her." This woman had been so condemned by religion that at the end of her life, rather than her faith being a source of comfort for her, it was a source of torment. Obviously, Nadia continues, the Christianity this woman was exposed to was not one of compassion and forgiveness. It was more of a moral reward and punishment system. And that's what a lot of us were taught. I had to raise my hand, I'm included. You want to go to heaven, you got to be good. Basically, that we are all rats in some kind of cruel cosmic lab experiment. We receive shocks from God when we go the wrong way, and little reward pellets for going the right way in our existential maze. And this is the kind of thinking, she says, that made Jesus tell this parable. So first she sums up those first few verses for us. She says, now all the bad people, the tax collectors and sinners who deserve to be punished, were coming near to listen to Jesus. And all the good people, the Pharisees and the scribes who deserved to be rewarded, were grumbling and saying, this fellow welcomes the bad people, and rather than punishing them for being bad, he totally just takes them out to dinner. So it's in response to this attitude that Jesus tells the parable of the two sons. The younger son asks for his inheritance early and then travels to another country and, like a fool, little edit there, gives himself and all his money over to things and people and chemicals that could never love him back. He squandered it all in what the text calls dissolute living. And she looked it up so we wouldn't have to. Dissolute, lack of restraint, marked by indulgence in things such as drink or promiscuous sex. So he loses everything. And when a famine comes, he, of course, is broke and miserable and starving. And then he remembers that at least the servants of his father's house have bread to eat, so he cleverly hatches a scheme to return home and get one over on his dad. Nowhere in the text does it say that he is truly sorry for the harm and the hurt he had done and wanted to make amends. This might seem cynical, she seems, but she honestly believes he was just hustling the other direction. So returning home with his head hung low for effect, he glances up and sees his father running to him. Now don't get the timing wrong here. The text says, as soon as the father saw his son, he was not filled with resentment. He was not filled with anger. He was not waiting to see if his son had become a good person and was sorry for what he did. The text said, as soon as he saw his son, he was filled with compassion and ran to meet him. And before the younger son could even get his totally rehearsed speech out of his mouth, the father throws his arms around him and absolutely covers him in his love. To the father, if one of his children comes home after really screwing everything up, it does not call for condemnation. It calls for a party. And so dad hires a DJ and an amazing caterer, and there is dancing and song and drink and joy. The younger son may have squandered everything in self-indulgent excess. But in another way, the older son was just as wasteful. Coming home from the field, the older brother hears a party underway, and thinking that love is a limited resource, he resents such a lavish show of it when he hears it's for his no-good younger brother. In other words, he was being a complete twit. And yet again, the father runs towards him, arms open wide, and covers him in the love that he has always had and will always have for his children. What was lost is found, what was dead is alive, said the father. Lost, found, dead, and alive are not moral categories that lend themselves to rewards and punishment. They are spiritual categories that lend themselves to divine compassion. The father sacrifices his dignity twice by running into the street to embrace his no-good children as if their no-goodness was of no matter. He lavishes love on them, not as a reward for their being good, but simply because that is the Father's nature. And here is the application of the story of the prodigals. Again, according to Nadia Bolz-Weber, we, all of us, are slightly off-brand children of a God who does things like that. So, in response to the snotty religious people of his day, who were trying desperately to uphold their bogus reward and punishment program, Jesus told them a parable about a seemingly bad son and a seemingly good son, and how not one thing about their behavior had any effect whatsoever on the heart of their Father. All the love that the Father had was theirs, no matter what. Everything that the Father had was theirs. So the tragic thing about this story isn't that one was selfish and one was resentful. The tragic thing is that neither of them trusted the love of the Father. And when that love is not trusted as being sufficient, you know what we do? We replace it with a punishment and reward system. She says, if my work as a pastor and theologian does nothing else in the world, I wish it to do this one thing: that those in my care may know this. If you have been told that God is some kind of punishing, angry twit with a killer surveillance system who is basically always disappointed with you for being a human being, then you have been lied to. The church has failed you, and I am so sorry. And I am right there with her. I was told that for years growing up in the church. That was the message of the church in the 50s and 60s and into the 70s. And my goal has been to not have that be my message. So the church has failed many of us, and I am so sorry. So she says, if you hear nothing else, hear this: that angry, punishing God is not the God revealed to us in the person of Jesus Christ. This Jesus, who ate with sinners and tax collectors and pissed off the religious authorities because he was so clearly free from their control, and who loved and healed and forgave people indiscriminately. Well, this Jesus was God's way of telling us who God is. So when you wander far from the fold, or when you live in a small way because you don't trust that you are loved and worthy to be loved, know this: all the forgiveness and mercy and reconciliation of God is already yours. It will not be taken away as a punishment, and it will not be granted as a reward. It is yours, no matter what. When God sees you, God is filled with compassion. Even if you aren't interested in it, all the love and mercy of God is running towards you, looking to wrap you up and just shower you with all of God's love. The DJ has been hired, the dancing has begun, and the feast has been prepared, even before you look up and see God coming at you. In closing, Bolz-Weber adds a kind of a personal epilogue. What she says, sort of like how I would like the story to end after the gospel reading ends. She says, I can see the older brother finally relenting and coming to the party that night that his little brother came home. After refusing to dance or drink or eat anything, maybe the compassion of the father infected him. Or maybe the groove of that Marvin Gaye song was too much to resist, and his head started bobbing and his toes started tapping, and the next time a waiter passed with a tray of champagne glasses, he finally took one. Eventually, he smiled at his younger brother from across the room, but his younger brother returned that smile. and the resentment and jealousy melted away. And when they embraced, it was as though the heart of the Father burned between them, and again, they loved each other. And soon the younger one started helping in the field, and they both became agents of the same grace and mercy and love and reconciliation that they received from the Father. Because that's what this thing is about, becoming what we receive. So, there is really no reason, she emphasizes, to get to the age of 82 afraid of God. There's no reason to get to the age of 82 resenting someone else because you think there's a limit to love. May we all trust God's compassion and an unlimited resource flowing freely down the road, toward all of us slightly off-brand, deeply loved children of God. Amen.